The streets of Romania's major cities were engulfed in chaos. Gunfire echoed, angry crowds gathered, and a dictatorial regime crumbled dramatically. But what happened during those fiery days? Was the Romanian Revolution a spontaneous act of the people, or a carefully orchestrated operation? Today, we uncover the hidden mysteries of the 1989 revolution. Between 1988 and 1989, communist regimes across Eastern Europe collapsed one after another, shaken by a wave of change. The Soviet Union, led by Mikhail Gorbachev, had abandoned its doctrine of military intervention, leaving Eastern European governments without the support that had kept them in power. This weakening of Soviet influence accelerated opposition movements in Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and Hungary. Poland was the first to break the barrier of fear. The Solidarity Trade Union, led by Lech Wałęsa, exerted such immense pressure that the communist regime was forced to hold the first semi-free elections in the Eastern Bloc. The opposition secured a landslide victory, and the Polish Communist Party had no choice but to relinquish power, paving the way for the collapse of the entire Soviet system. East Germany quickly became swept up in the revolutionary wave. Protests in Leipzig grew in size, defying the strict surveillance of the notorious Stasi. Under immense pressure, Erich Honecker's regime faltered, and on November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Enthusiastic crowds crossed from east to west, hammering away at the symbol of Europe's division. Czechoslovakia was not far behind. The Velvet Revolution unfolded with incredible speed, and within just a few weeks, hundreds of thousands of people flooded the streets, demanding freedom. Unable to withstand the pressure, the communist regime resigned peacefully. Dissident Václav Havel was elected president, marking the end of the dictatorship. Bulgaria experienced its transformation, though by different means. Todor Zhivkov, the authoritarian leader who had ruled for 35 years, was removed in an internal coup orchestrated within the Communist Party itself. Reform had become inevitable, and a change in leadership was the only option. Hungary opted for a more gradual transition. Reformists within the party opened the borders to the west and organized the first free elections, marking the official end of the communist era. All of Europe watched in astonishment as seemingly immovable regimes crumbled at a dizzying pace. The Soviet system had reached its final chapter, and the wave of freedom had become unstoppable. Unlike other Eastern Bloc countries, where regime change occurred relatively peacefully, Romania experienced a bloody uprising marked by confusion and numerous unanswered questions. While communist governments in Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria collapsed under the pressure of popular protests, Nicolae Ceaușescu stubbornly refused any form of reform. In this tense climate, the Romanian Revolution was defined by extreme violence and widespread chaos. Nicolae Ceaușescu was born on January 26, 1918, in the small rural village of Scornicești, Olt County, in southern Romania. The third of 9 children in a poor peasant family, young Ceaușescu grew up in a world marked by extreme poverty and harsh living conditions. His father, Andruța Ceaușescu, was a modest farmer known for his strict discipline, while his mother, Alexandra, struggled to provide for the large family. Romania, at the time of Ceaușescu's birth, was a monarchical state under King Ferdinand I. But social inequality was deep, and the country was struggling with the economic consequences of World War I. The rural population, especially in Wallachia, where Ceaușescu was raised, lived in poor conditions, with limited access to education and necessities. By the age of 11, Ceaușescu had left school and moved to Bucharest, where he worked as an apprentice shoemaker under Alexandru Sandulescu, a known communist sympathizer. This moment proved crucial, as it introduced him to underground communist ideology at a time when Romania was still ruled by King Carol II and heavily influenced by right-wing nationalist movements like the Iron Guard. By 1933, at only 15 years old, Ceaușescu joined the Romanian Communist Party, which was still illegal and operating in secrecy under the pro-monarchy, anti-communist government. His early years in the party were spent distributing anti-government propaganda, organizing workers' strikes, and advocating for Marxist ideals. His activism caught the attention of the authorities, and in 1936, he was arrested for the first time for his communist activities. Over the next few years, Ceaușescu was frequently detained, moving between different prisons, including Doftana prison, where he met Gheorghe Gheorghiu-Dej, a key figure who would later become the leader of communist Romania. Ceaușescu's prison years shaped his political persona. He was known among fellow inmates for his fanatic loyalty to the Communist Party and his hatred of the monarchy. During his time in detention, he gained a reputation as an extremist, admired by some for his discipline, but mocked by others for his high-pitched voice and awkward social demeanor. He remained in prison until 1944, when Romania's political landscape shifted dramatically. During World War II, Romania was aligned with Nazi Germany under Marshal Ion Antonescu, sending troops to fight against the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. However, by August 23, 1944, King Michael I led a successful coup against Antonescu, switching Romania to the Allied side. This opened the door for Soviet influence, and as the Red Army entered Romania, the underground Communist Party suddenly found itself in a position of growing power. Ceaușescu, freshly released from prison, wasted no time in advancing his political career. He quickly became one of Gheorghe Gheorghiu-Dej's most trusted protégés, benefiting from the Soviet-backed Communist Party's rise to dominance. By 1945, with Soviet occupation securing communist control in Romania, Ceaușescu was appointed to several key positions within the party. He worked closely with the newly formed People's Republic of Romania, which formally replaced the monarchy in 1947 after King Michael I was forced to abdicate under Soviet pressure. Ceaușescu's early roles included serving as Deputy Minister of Agriculture and later as Minister of the Armed Forces, where he worked on consolidating Soviet-style military policies in Romania. His close ties to the Soviet Union helped him rise rapidly through party ranks. However, what truly solidified Ceaușescu's power was his unwavering loyalty to Gheorghe Gheorghiu-Dej, the undisputed communist leader of Romania from 1947 until 1965. Throughout the 1950s, Ceaușescu became one of Dej's most trusted allies, especially during the political purges against so-called enemies of the people, where former communist comrades were imprisoned or executed. His strategic patience paid off. When Gheorghiu-Dej died in March 1965, Ceaușescu was positioned as his natural successor, taking control of the Romanian Communist Party and, ultimately, the country itself. At just 47 years old, Nicolae Ceaușescu had become the most powerful man in Romania. But his reign would soon evolve into one of the most repressive and bizarre dictatorships in Eastern Europe. Initially, he was seen as a reformist leader, open to the West and willing to defy Moscow. In 1968, his refusal to support the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia earned him international sympathy. Western leaders regarded him as a milder dictator, and Romania received generous loans from Western countries. However, this image gradually changed. During the 1970s, Ceaușescu began constructing a cult of personality, inspired by North Korea's Kim Il-sung. He implemented extreme austerity measures to repay foreign debt, leading to food shortages, severe resource rationing, and a dramatic decline in living standards. Among his notable achievements were forced industrialization, nationwide electrification, and the ambitious People's House project, the largest administrative building in Europe. He also continued Romania's policy of autonomy from the Soviet Union, maintaining diplomatic relations with both power blocs. Yet, these accomplishments came at an enormous cost. The systematization program destroyed entire villages, The Romanian secret police closely monitored citizens' every move, and censorship was absolute. By the 1980s, widespread famine, lack of heating, and electricity shortages had turned Romania into a suffocating prison. Meanwhile, the Ceaușescu family's influence over the state grew significantly. Elena Ceaușescu, the dictator's wife, proclaimed herself a world-renowned scientist, despite having no real credentials. She was promoted to prestigious academic positions and wielded significant political power. Their children, Nicu, Zoya, and Valentin, enjoyed extraordinary privileges, with Nicolae Ceaușescu being considered his father's successor despite his notorious reputation as a reckless playboy with violent tendencies. Everything began in Timișoara on December 16, 1989, with what seemed like a local conflict, the threatened eviction of Pastor Laszlo Tokes, a vocal critic of the regime. This incident ignited the first sparks of resistance. Within hours, hundreds of people gathered in front of his home, chanting against the authorities. The following day, the protests grew, transforming into an open challenge to Nicolae Ceaușescu's dictatorial rule. The state's response was swift and brutal. The Securitate, army, and militia were mobilized to crush the uprising. Protesters were beaten, arrested, and fired upon. On the night of December 17th, Timișoara's streets turned into a war zone. Tanks rolled in. Soldiers opened fire indiscriminately, and hospitals filled with the wounded. Dozens were killed. Some of their bodies were secretly transported to Bucharest to be cremated at the Cenușa crematorium, in an attempt to erase all traces of the massacre. By December 20th, however, the regime had lost control of the city. Timișoara declared itself the first free city of Romania, as protesters occupied public buildings and the army began to defect. But the revolution was only beginning. The news of defiance spread across Romania, inspiring other cities to rise. With Timișoara in open revolt, the regime's hold on power weakened. Ceaușescu underestimated the scale of the crisis. Returning from a state visit to Iran on December 20th, he dismissed the events as hooliganism and ordered a harsh crackdown. Yet, across Romania, people were no longer afraid. The revolutionary fire had ignited. Inspired by the courage of Timișoara, thousands took to the streets of Arad on December 21st. Protesters stormed the Communist Party headquarters, demanding an end to Ceaușescu's rule. Initially, the authorities responded with repression, but by December 22nd, the local army unit refused to fire on demonstrators, effectively liberating the city. On the same day, thousands gathered in Cluj-Napoca's central square, chanting against the dictatorship. The army opened fire, killing at least 26 people and wounding dozens more. The massacre only fueled the determination of the protesters, and the next day, Cluj, too, joined the wave of rebellion. In Sibiu, where Nicolae Ceaușescu, the dictator's son, held power as local Communist Party leader, repression was even more severe. The army and Securitate fired on the crowds, leaving around 100 dead. The city became one of the bloodiest battlefields of the revolution, with chaotic shootouts between various security forces. Brașov already had a history of opposition against Ceaușescu's regime. On November 15, 1987, workers from the Steagul Roșu factory organized one of the first major anti-communist uprisings in Romania, protesting against the unbearable living conditions. The movement was brutally suppressed, with numerous protesters arrested and deported to other cities. In December 1989, inspired by the uprising in Timișoara, the people of Brașov took to the streets once again on December 21st, gathering mainly in Piața Sfatului and in front of the County Communist Party Committee. Thousands of demonstrators chanted slogans against Ceaușescu, demanding freedom and regime change. Initially, the security forces attempted to disperse the crowd, but the repression was not as violent as in other cities. On December 21st, Nicolae Ceaușescu organized a support rally in Palace Square, now Revolution Square. Expecting a display of loyalty, he instead faced disaster. For the first time, the crowd began booing him, and state television broadcasted images that exposed the crumbling authority of his regime. Shocked, Ceaușescu attempted to calm the crowd, but it was already too late. Protests erupted across the country, and violent street clashes between demonstrators and security forces intensified. On December 22nd at 12:06 p.m., the dictator fled by helicopter from the rooftop of the Central Committee building. However, his escape did not mark the end of the revolution. On the contrary, it triggered even greater chaos. With Ceaușescu gone, the power structures collapsed, and the army officially announced its support for the people. But who would take control? This question sparked one of the greatest controversies of the Romanian Revolution. After leaving the Central Committee building in a helicopter piloted by Vasile Maluțan, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, along with Manea Mănescu and Emil Bobu, members of the CPX, and 2 officers of the 5th Directorate of the Securitate, the bodyguards of the presidential couple, initially flew to Snagov, seeking refuge in a protocol villa. However, their plans quickly unraveled as they realized the situation was deteriorating by the minute. The army and the population had turned against them, and the risk of capture was imminent. Trying to find a loyal military unit in Pitești, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu decided to leave Snagov. As the helicopter approached the Boteni airfield, it was identified via radio, and the pilots informed them that they could be shot down. At that moment, Ceaușescu ordered the pilots to land on a country road near T2. Captain Marian Rusu and Major Florian Ratz stopped the Dacia driven by Dr. Nicolae Deca. They continued their journey without Captain Rusu until Dr. Deca abandoned them. Dr. Nicolae Deca emerged at a crucial moment. A simple doctor or a man on a covert mission? His involvement in the escape of the Ceaușescus raises many questions. Deca, despite warnings, insisted on helping the fleeing couple, even though he wasn't asked to. His respectful greeting to the dictator, paired with a cryptic remark about being the grandson of the furrier Sandulescu from your headquarters, hinted at something more than a casual encounter. But it was the mysterious package left behind in his car's trunk that truly deepened the mystery. Weighing around 20 kilograms and seemingly containing millions in cash, it vanished without a trace. Deca departed for the United States shortly after, quietly disappearing from the scene. Was Dr. Nicolae Deca merely in the right place at the right time? Or was he part of a larger, secret operation involving high-stakes espionage? Later, Major Florian Ratz forced someone else, Petrișor Nicolae, to drive them further, but he also abandoned them. However, realizing that the regime had already collapsed, the officer abandoned them near Târgoviște. Shortly after, a militia patrol arrested the Ceaușescus and transported them to a military unit in Târgoviște, where they spent the last days of their lives. Between December 22nd and December 25th, they were interrogated and held under strict guard, in humiliating conditions for a couple who, just days before, had absolute control over Romania. After Ceaușescu's escape, Romania was plunged into a nightmare. In Bucharest and other major cities, gunfire erupted randomly, and reports of invisible snipers, sabotage, and attacks on civilians spread rapidly. Officially, these were the terrorists loyal to the regime, attempting to stop the revolution. But who were they? Theories vary. Some believe they were former members of the Securitate, others think they were infiltrators sent to create chaos, while some suggest it was all a diversion meant to justify the consolidation of the new regime. To this day, the identity of these so-called terrorists remains a mystery. Following Ceaușescu's escape, Romania descended into a state of widespread panic. In just a few days, hundreds of people were killed and thousands were wounded. Some of the most violent events took place in Bucharest, particularly around the Romanian television headquarters, where intense clashes occurred between revolutionary forces and those still loyal to the regime between December 22nd and 24th. Estimates suggest that over 200 people were killed in this area alone. The fighting escalated quickly in Brașov, Cluj, and Sibiu after the dictator's flight. In Sibiu, a city controlled by Ceaușescu's son, Nicu, the conflict turned especially violent, with around 100 people losing their lives in clashes between demonstrators and security forces. Cluj also became an epicenter of violence, with more than 26 people killed and dozens wounded in the ensuing repression. One of the most controversial incidents occurred in Otopeni, where, due to a chaotic exchange of fire, 40 young soldiers were killed. According to some sources, military units loyal to the regime and revolutionary forces mistakenly attacked each other due to misinformation and general confusion. Around the military academy and other strategic points in Bucharest, multiple attacks by the so-called terrorists were reported. Between December 23rd and 25th, the battles claimed hundreds of victims. Yet the identity of those who fired on civilians remains a mystery to this day. Some witnesses claim these terrorists were Securitate members trained to defend the regime at any cost, while others believe they were part of a staged diversion meant to justify the seizure of power by the new leadership. Even today, many revolution files remain incomplete, and the identity and motives of the terrorists continue to be a subject of speculation. Was it genuine chaos or a carefully orchestrated plan? On December 25, 1989, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were subjected to a lightning-fast trial in Târgoviște. The improvised military tribunal accused them of genocide, undermining the national economy, and other crimes. After a trial lasting only a few hours, the verdict was clear. The death penalty. The two were executed shortly after the sentencing. But this trial raises many questions. Was it an act of justice, or merely a way to eliminate them quickly, so certain secrets would not come to light? The new regime, led by Ion Iliescu, benefited greatly from their disappearance. The trial was hastily arranged, with no opportunity for a proper defense. The charges were read out, and the Ceaușescus were found guilty in a matter of minutes. The swift execution that followed was broadcast around the world, a stark and brutal end to their rule. Critics argue that the trial was a mere formality, a show trial designed to legitimize the new leadership and prevent any possibility of the Ceaușescus rallying support. The lack of transparency and the speed of the proceedings have led many to question whether true justice was served. The new regime's quick consolidation of power, following the execution, raises suspicions. Did they act out of fear of what the Ceaușescus might reveal, or was it a necessary step to stabilize a nation in chaos? The trial and execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu remain one of the most controversial events of the Romanian Revolution, a moment that symbolizes both the end of a brutal dictatorship and the murky beginnings of a new era. As the Ceaușescus fell, a new leadership emerged in the chaos, raising questions about whether the revolution was truly a people's uprising or a carefully orchestrated coup. Ion Iliescu, a former Communist Party official, Iliescu had been sidelined by Ceaușescu years earlier, seen as a potential rival. On December 22nd, as Ceaușescu's flight left a power vacuum, Iliescu swiftly took charge of the National Salvation Front, FSN, presenting himself as the voice of democracy. He would later become Romania's first post-communist president, though his legitimacy remains debated. Petre Roman, a professor and political figure who emerged as the face of the revolution. He gained prominence in the early televised moments of the FSN's takeover, becoming a key voice advocating for reform. By December 26th, he was appointed prime minister in the transitional government, positioning himself as a reformist leader. The revolution's turning point came when sections of the Romanian army abandoned Ceaușescu and sided with the protesters. Among the most critical figures in this shift was Victor Athanasius Stănculescu, a high-ranking general who initially followed Ceaușescu's orders to suppress the uprising. However, sensing the regime's inevitable collapse, he strategically delayed orders and redirected troops away from defending the dictator. On December 22nd, he played a crucial role in Ceaușescu's removal, later overseeing the dictator's trial. His actions remain controversial, as he was later accused of crimes against humanity for his role in suppressing early protests in Timișoara. The 1989 Romanian Revolution was the defining moment that changed the course of the country's history. Romania transitioned from an oppressive communist regime to a democracy, although the process was marked by instability and controversy. Those dramatic days demonstrated the power of a united people, standing against dictatorship and their burning desire for freedom. However, the cost of this revolution was immense. According to official statistics, over 1,100 people were killed, and approximately 3,300 were injured. The highest number of casualties occurred in Bucharest, Timișoara, Cluj, and Sibiu, where the clashes between revolutionaries, the army, and security forces were most intense. The mystery surrounding the so-called terrorists and the post-Ceaușescu fighting significantly contributed to the high number of victims. Many questions remain unanswered even today. Who was responsible for the orders to open fire on civilians? Was it a diversion intended to destabilize the country? Despite numerous investigations, the full truth about those days remains buried in archives. The 1989 Romanian Revolution was a crucial turning point for the country, but the sacrifice of those who fell must always be remembered. Modern Romania exists thanks to the courage of those who risked their lives for a free future. More than 3 decades after the Romanian Revolution, many questions remain unresolved. Was it a genuine popular uprising or a disguised coup? How much of those events was manipulated from behind the scenes? One thing is certain: the Romanian Revolution permanently altered the country's destiny. But like any major historical event, it remains surrounded by mysteries that may never be fully uncovered. If you've made it this far, it means you're truly passionate about history and eager to uncover the truth behind the events that changed Romania. Only 1% of those who read or watch content like this show their support. If you want to be part of this elite group of truth seekers who help spread awareness, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. Be one of those who keep history alive and share knowledge.